What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. This is the 14th video of my 25 days of Flutter tutorial series. In this video, we're going to be working with the GitHub API. So we're going to be taking what we learned in the last two videos and taking the HTTP Flutter package and use that to fetch data from GitHub and display that in an application. So this is the app so far. It is just a simple stateful widget. The first thing that we want to do is to add the HTTP package. So open up pubspec.yaml and copy and paste this line into your file. So if you go to the GitHub documentation for the API, this is the endpoint we will be fetching, the repos endpoint. So you don't need to have an app, you don't need to be authenticated, any of that. Anyone can use and interact with the API and get data. This is the default response, all of this. So I've gone through and I picked out 4 items that we're going to focus in on. The HTML URL is one, the name is another, and there are 2 more. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a Dart class for this response. So let me go ahead and create a models folder, and I'll create a new file called repo.dart. Define a class repo, and we'll say string name, string HTML URL, which in the response, in the JSON response, looks like this. We'll say int stargazers count. That looks like this in the response. Make sure to spell that correctly. Stargazers, just like that. And then we want the description. Perfect. Let's go ahead and create our constructor. And then we need to deserialize this. So we'll say factory repo dot from JSON map string comma dynamic JSON, and then inside of here we will simply return the repo. We'll set the name equal to name, and then we copy and paste that 3 times. HTML URL. Okay, just like that. So this right here, class repo, corresponds to 1 repository. So one of those. But a lot of the time, you will have more than 1 repository. So we need to get a list of repositories. So to do that, let's create another class. We'll just call this all, so all repositories. And this will simply be a list of repos. Call that repos. And if you recall the last video, I believe this was the 5th type of JSON that we looked at. We'll create our constructor. And then for our deserializer, it's going to be a bit different. We still need to say factory all.fromJSON. And instead of being a map of type string and dynamic, this will be a list of type dynamic. There we go. And then we can create our list of repos like that. Make sure that's a capital L. Call that repos. That is a new list. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say repos is equal to JSON.map. We'll say R for repos, arrow notation, repo dot from JSON, passing in our repo, and then we need to say dot to list, end it off with a semicolon. And then we can drop below here and simply return our class all, passing in repos as repos. So this is our model. Again, this class here corresponds to one repository, and this class is simply getting a list of all of those repositories. So let's jump back into main.dart and fetch that data. Let's first import the required dependencies. Say package HTTP, just like that. We need our convert package, so import dart convert, and we need to import our repo. So we'll say GitHub API, which is the name of my project. So write your name /models/repo. Let's import this HTTP as HTTP. Perfect. So now we can use all of these three imports. So the first thing we're going to do is right above our class home, we're going to fetch this data. So this will be of type future all, which is the class from here. Name this method fetch repos. This will be asynchronous. And then inside of here, what we are going to do is we're going to say final response is equal to await http.get, and the URL that we want, if we go back here, is in this format. So let me copy this right here, paste that in. So https://api.github.com/users, and then the username, I'm just going to use my username, but you can use your username as if you want. And then /repos is the endpoint. Perfect. Now we're going to say if that is a successful response. So if response.statuscode equals to 200, that means we have data. So we'll need to use that here. We'll do that in a second. Else, let's just throw an exception. And we'll just say failed to fetch repos. So inside of the if block, let's first print out our response.body so we can see what we're working with. And then we're going to just want to return all .from JSON, and then we're going to say JSON.decode and pass in that response.body, just like that. So let's go ahead and fetch that and see what we get printed out. So to call that method, we're going to want to go into our home state class, and we will say void init state. We'll say super.init state, and then we'll just call our fetch repos method, just like that. Let me open up a debug console, and if we refresh this, we should get some data. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, I get an ID, node ID, a name, benjamincarlson.io, so that's my first repository, and then a bunch of other information. And again, that corresponds with this data. Let's go ahead and use this now. So let's actually display it to the user. Above the override, we're going to say future all future repo, because we need a reference to this data, so we need something to actually hold it. Just like that. And let's come below here, and we will change this body to loop through all the data and display it. Let's first set this to some padding. We'll give edge insets.all 8.0. And then the child to this will be a container. And that will have a child of FutureBuilder. Type all. And this takes in builder future. So let's give the future to be equal to future repo. And the builder will say, if I go back here, it auto-completed for me. Builder, we want this one, context snapshot. Format that up. And inside of here, we can access our data on this snapshot object. So we're going to say if snapshot.hasData, display it here, else if snapshot.hasError, we want to display that to the user. So we'll just return a text widget saying error, wrap that in a center widget, and then we will say else. So if there's no data and there's no error, we must be fetching it. So let us display that to the user. We'll just say return center. And the child here, we'll just use a circular progress indicator. Perfect. So we're getting that indefinitely now. So if there's data, what do we want to do? Well, let's first just return a column with all that data. So let's say data. Okay, so I just stopped my app because this was displaying indefinitely and it was causing my machine to get pretty loud. So let's return back to this if statement. So if there is data, the first thing that we want to do is we need to add that to a list. So we'll say list type repo, say repos, equal to list repo. And then we need to loop through each of the repositories and add them to this list. And then we can call the map function on this list and map that to a widget. We'll say for int I equals 0, I is less than snapshot.data.length or .repos.length I++. So loop through each one and we'll add that to our list like this. And that takes in a repository, and that takes the 4 parameters. We'll say name is equal to snapshot.data.repos sub I dot name. Then we just copy and paste this, and then we have description. We have the URL, and we have these stars, just like that. All right, so once we have them in our list, we can now return a list view, and then we'll say the children are equal to repos dot map. And we'll map each repository to a card. And we need to call .toList at the end of that. Format that up. And then inside of this card, for now, we'll format it later. I just want to get it on the screen now. So we'll just set the child equal to a column. And then for each of these, we'll just say R, or actually, we access it via R dot and then each of the variables, but we need to wrap that in a text widget. So text R dot name, text R dot stargazer's count dot toString, because that is an integer. And now if I go ahead and run this app, we should see a list view of all of our repos inside of their own unique card. So we're getting nothing displayed, and I just realized we hadn't changed this method here. Before we just called the method and printed out the data, we actually never set this variable future repo to be equal to that data. So let's go ahead and do that, and that should fix this. Alright guys, so as you can see, this is working. So I have all of my repositories mapped to a card inside of a list view. So next I want to go ahead and just add some basic styling to this to make it look a bit nicer. First thing I'm going to do is I am going to make the color of the card a nice light blue, maybe a blue 300. There we go. And then we're going to add some text styling. So let me say style, text style. I'm going to make the font size maybe 25.0. And then for the column, let's give the main axis alignment and cross axis alignment both start, just like that. Push everything up over to the top left. And then I want to put the name and the star count in a row and make them opposite from each other. So stars in the upper right, name in the upper left. Go ahead and put a row, and that will be main axis alignment, space between, grab the name, and we'll grab the star count, just like that. And then let's throw some padding around this column. We'll refactor this, wrap with padding. 8 looks good. Let's make this a bit bigger. And then we'll make the description text maybe 23. So that's looking a little better. Obviously, there's a lot more we could add to this to make it look better, and there's more functionality that we could add. So I encourage you to maybe play around with this application and see what you can add to this. And I'm noticing that some of these have an overflow on the right. There's really nothing you could do about that because this is just one big string, so you'd have to make the text smaller. But I'm not going to worry about that right now, because we were able to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. And before I end this video, I want to mention this useful site here, JSON to Dart. So if you recall, when we made our class repo and did all of this part right here is what this converter does. So if I go ahead and I copy all of this and I paste it into here and hit make a Dart class name, we'll just say repo. If I generate Dart, you'll notice we get everything we did manually. And this is doing it for all of the JSON, which there's a lot. But this is a pretty useful thing if you are working with JSON in this size. The only problem with this is it does not add this class here, so you will have to manually realize that it is a list of maps, and you will have to manually do this and make this class. But for doing this type of stuff, it works great. So that is it for this video, guys. I hope you were able to follow along and learn how to interact with the GitHub API. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at some Flutter animations.